Have you ever been laughed at so hard that the sound echoed in your nightmares for months afterward? Have you ever felt so small, so invisible, so utterly worthless that you questioned whether you even deserved to exist in the same space as everyone else? Well, let me tell you about the day that changed my entire life. The day I walked into what I thought would be just another ordinary establishment and walked out a completely different person. My name doesn't matter right now. What matters is what happened to me and, more importantly, what I did about it. This isn't just a story about revenge, though I'll admit that played a part. This is a story about transformation, about dignity, about refusing to let the cruelty of others define who you are or who you can become. So sit back, because what I'm about to share with you is raw, it's real, and it's probably going to make you feel things you didn't expect to feel today. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember that detail so clearly because Tuesdays had always been my favorite day of the week. Something about the middle of the routine, the predictability of it all. I had just finished a particularly exhausting shift at my dead-end job, the kind of work that leaves your body aching and your spirit even more bruised. I was working at a warehouse back then, loading and unloading boxes for barely minimum wage, coming home every night smelling like cardboard and sweat, my hands rough and calloused, my back constantly screaming in pain. But I was surviving, or at least that's what I told myself every morning when I dragged myself out of bed. I had been saving up for months, counting every single dollar, skipping meals sometimes just to put a little extra aside, because I had this one thing I wanted to treat myself to, this one small luxury that I felt I had earned after months of grueling labor and sacrifice. There was this upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place I'd walk past every day on my way to the bus stop, pressing my face against the window like a kid at a candy store, watching well-dressed people laugh and enjoy meals that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I had been dreaming about eating there just once, just to feel what it was like to be on the other side of that window, to be someone who belonged in a place like that. So on this particular Tuesday, with my savings finally reaching the amount I needed, I decided today was the day. I remember the excitement I felt, the nervous energy that made my hands shake slightly as I pushed open those heavy glass doors. The restaurant was everything I had imagined, elegant lighting that seemed to make everything glow, the soft murmur of sophisticated conversation, the clinking of expensive silverware against fine china, the smell of herbs and wine and things I couldn't even identify, but that smelled like success, like a life I'd only ever seen in movies. I was wearing my best clothes, which I'll admit weren't much, a button-down shirt I'd bought from a thrift store that was slightly too big, pants that were clean but clearly worn, shoes I'd polished that morning until they shined, even though you could see the cracks in the leather if you looked close enough. I thought I looked decent. I thought I had made an effort. I thought surely that would be enough. But I was wrong. So incredibly wrong. The hostess at the front desk looked up as I approached, and I saw it immediately. That flicker in her eyes, that subtle shift in her expression that told me everything I needed to know before a single word was spoken. She looked me up and down, her gaze traveling from my carefully combed hair down to my polished but cracked shoes, and in that moment, in that split second of judgment, I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller, until I felt like I might disappear entirely. "Can I help you?" she asked. But the way she said it, there was no genuine offer of help in those words. It was more like a challenge, like she was really asking, "What are you doing here?" I cleared my throat, trying to sound confident, trying to sound like I belonged. "Yes, I'd like a table for one, please," I said, and I hated how my voice came out, slightly shaky, slightly desperate, like I was asking for permission to exist in this space. She didn't move, didn't reach for a menu, didn't even glance at her reservation book. Instead, she just stared at me for what felt like an eternity. And then, and this is the part that still makes my blood run cold when I think about it, she smiled. But it wasn't a kind smile, it wasn't a welcoming smile. It was the kind of smile that said she was enjoying this, enjoying my discomfort, enjoying the power she held in this moment. "I'm sorry," she said, though her tone made it clear she wasn't sorry at all, "but we're fully booked for the evening." I looked past her into the restaurant. I could see empty tables, at least 5 or 6 of them, scattered throughout the dining room like accusations against her lie. "But there are empty tables," I said, pointing, my voice gaining a little strength from the obviousness of the deception. "I can see them right there." Her smile widened, and that's when she did it. That's when she laughed. Not a quiet chuckle, not a subtle sound of dismissal, but a full, clear laugh that seemed to fill the entire entrance area. And then, as if responding to some silent signal, a waiter who had been standing nearby joined in, and then another staff member, and suddenly I was standing there being laughed at by three people, three strangers who had decided in an instant that I was so far beneath them that I didn't even deserve basic human dignity. "Look," the hostess said, her voice dripping with condescension, "this is a fine dining establishment. We have a certain standard. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the burger place down the street. I hear they have a very affordable menu." The other staff members laughed harder at that, and I felt something inside me break, something fundamental and important that I didn't even know could break. My face burned with shame. My eyes stung with tears I absolutely refused to let fall. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as I stood there, frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but absorb their cruelty like a sponge soaking up poison. Other diners had started to notice the commotion. I could feel their eyes on me, could sense them judging me too, confirming what these staff members had decided, that I didn't belong, that I was less than, that I was something to be laughed at and dismissed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell them about the months I'd saved, about the dreams I'd had of this one simple meal, about the fact that I was a human being who deserved basic respect, regardless of what my clothes looked like or how much money was in my bank account. But I couldn't. The words stuck in my throat like shards of glass, cutting me from the inside, and all I could do was turn around and walk out of that restaurant with whatever shreds of dignity I had left clinging to me like cobwebs. The cool evening air hit my face as I stepped back outside, and that's when I let the tears fall, standing there on the sidewalk while well-dressed people walked past me, probably wondering what was wrong with this emotional mess of a person blocking their path. I felt so small in that moment, so utterly defeated, like the universe had confirmed what some dark part of me had always suspected, that I wasn't good enough, that I would never be good enough, that people like me were meant to stay in our place, to accept our lot in life, to never aspire to anything more than survival. I walked for hours that night, not going anywhere in particular, just walking through the city streets as the sun set and the lights came on, and life continued around me as if nothing had happened, as if the world hadn't just shown me exactly where I stood in its hierarchy. And as I walked, something began to shift inside me. Something dark and determined and absolutely unbreakable began to form in the hollow space where my hope used to be. Those people had laughed at me. They had humiliated me. They had treated me like I was invisible, like I was nothing. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have known in that moment of their casual cruelty, was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Because I wasn't going to forget this. I wasn't going to let it go, and I absolutely was not going to let them get away with it. Have you ever felt that kind of rage, that cold, calculating anger that doesn't burn hot, but instead freezes everything inside you until you're made of nothing but ice and determination? That's what I felt as I walked home that night, as I climbed the stairs to my tiny apartment, as I sat on my bed in the darkness and made a promise to myself that would change everything. Let me take you back a little further, because you need to understand who I was before that day to truly appreciate what happened after. I grew up poor, not the romantic kind of poor you see in movies where everyone is struggling but happy, but the real, grinding, soul-crushing kind of poor that leaves scars you can't see but carry forever. My parents did their best, I never doubt that, but their best wasn't enough to keep the electricity on sometimes, wasn't enough to make sure there was always food in the fridge, wasn't enough to protect me from the looks other kids gave me at school when I showed up in the same worn clothes day after day. I learned early what it meant to be judged for circumstances beyond your control, learned what it felt like to be treated as less than human simply because you didn't have what others had. My father worked 3 jobs and still couldn't make ends meet. I watched him deteriorate over the years, watched the hope drain from his eyes until he was just going through the motions, a ghost of whatever dreams he'd once had. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families, coming home exhausted and defeated, telling us stories about the beautiful homes she worked in, the expensive things people had, the way they treated her like she was invisible, like the furniture they owned. I promised myself I would never end up like them, that I would find a way to break the cycle, to become someone who mattered, someone who couldn't be ignored or dismissed or laughed at. But life had other plans, as it usually does. I dropped out of college after 1 semester because I couldn't afford it, couldn't bear taking on the debt, couldn't reconcile the cost with the uncertain promise of a better future. I took whatever jobs I could find, worked myself to exhaustion, saved every penny I could, but somehow there was always something that came up, some emergency or unexpected expense that wiped out whatever progress I'd made. By the time that Tuesday rolled around, I was 28 years old and felt like I had nothing to show for my existence. No accomplishments, no success, no proof that I was anything more than just another face in the crowd, another nobody struggling to survive in a world that didn't care whether I lived or died. That restaurant represented something to me, something beyond just a meal. It represented a threshold I could cross, a tiny victory I could claim, a moment where I could pretend, even just for an hour, that I was someone who mattered, someone who belonged in beautiful spaces, someone who deserved nice things. And when they refused me, when they laughed at me, it wasn't just about being denied entry to a restaurant. It was about being told once again that people like me don't get to have those moments, that we're meant to stay in our designated spaces, looking through windows at lives we'll never live, dreaming dreams that will never come true. The rejection hurt so deeply because it confirmed every fear I'd ever had about myself, every doubt, every insecurity, every painful moment of my childhood when I was made to feel less than. It was like all those years of struggle and sacrifice and hope had been crushed in an instant by three strangers who thought I was so beneath them that I deserved to be mocked. I had spent my entire life being invisible, being overlooked, being dismissed, and I had accepted it as just the way things were, the natural order of a world that valued money and status above human decency. But something about that moment, something about the sound of their laughter and the cruelty in their eyes, flipped a switch inside me that I didn't even know existed. I didn't want to be invisible anymore. I didn't want to accept my place at the bottom of the hierarchy anymore. And most importantly, I didn't want to let them win. In the days following that humiliation, I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind, hearing their laughter, seeing their contemptuous faces, feeling that searing shame that made me want to disappear. I would be at work, mechanically moving boxes from one place to another, and suddenly I'd be back in that restaurant entrance, frozen and helpless while they mocked me. I would be trying to fall asleep at night, and their voices would echo in my head, telling me I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong, that I should know my place. It was torture, but it was also fuel, because with every replay, with every memory of that pain, my determination grew stronger. I started thinking about revenge, at first in vague, undefined ways, imagining scenarios where I would somehow prove them wrong, show them they had made a mistake. But those fantasies felt hollow, because they required me to actually become someone different, someone successful, someone who could walk back into that restaurant and demand their respect. And that seemed impossible. I was a warehouse worker, with no education, no connections, no resources, no path forward that I could see. How does someone like me transform into someone like that? How do you bridge that gap between who you are and who you need to be? I had no idea, but I knew I had to try, because the alternative was accepting defeat, accepting that they were right about me, and I absolutely refused to do that. Have you ever made a decision that you knew would change everything, even though you had no idea how you were going to make it happen? That's where I was in those dark days after the incident, standing at a crossroads between giving up and fighting back, between accepting my fate and creating a new one. The decision came to me on a Friday night, exactly 1 week after the humiliation, as I sat in my apartment eating instant noodles for dinner, because that's all I could afford, and staring at the wall with nothing but my thoughts for company. I was thinking about my life, really thinking about it maybe for the first time ever, taking inventory of what I had and what I didn't have, and what I wanted that seemed so impossibly far away. And in that moment of brutal honesty with myself, I realized something fundamental. I had been playing defense my entire life, reacting to circumstances rather than creating them, accepting limitations rather than challenging them, surviving rather than truly living. Those people at the restaurant hadn't just refused me service, they had held up a mirror that showed me exactly what I had become, someone so defeated by life that even I didn't think I belonged in nice places, someone so beaten down that I had accepted invisibility as my permanent state. And I hated what I saw in that mirror, hated it with an intensity that took my breath away. I made a decision right then, sitting on my worn couch with my cheap noodles, that I was going to become someone completely different, someone those people wouldn't recognize, someone they couldn't dismiss or laugh at, someone who demanded respect simply by walking into a room. I didn't know how yet. I didn't have a plan, I barely had any resources, but I had something more important than any of that. I had a burning need to prove them wrong, to prove myself wrong, to transform so completely that the person I was in that moment would become nothing but a distant memory. The first thing I did was take stock of what I actually had to work with, and let me tell you, it wasn't much, but it was something. I had a functioning brain, I had time, I had access to the internet, I had a deep well of anger and determination that could fuel me through whatever challenges lay ahead. I started researching, spending every free moment I had online, learning about success stories, about people who had come from nothing and built something, about the skills and knowledge and strategies that separated those who succeeded from those who stayed stuck. I read everything I could find about business, about investing, about marketing, about psychology, about negotiation, about presentation, about every single thing I thought might help me become the person I needed to be. I turned my tiny apartment into a classroom, covering my walls with notes and goals and reminders of why I was doing this, creating an environment that constantly reinforced my new identity, even when I felt like giving up. I looked at my warehouse job differently too. Instead of seeing it as a dead end, I started seeing it as a resource. I was getting paid to build physical strength and mental toughness. I was in an environment where I could observe management and leadership and understand what worked and what didn't. I was surrounded by people from all walks of life who had stories and lessons to share if I bothered to ask and listen. I became a student of everything and everyone around me, absorbing information like a sponge, looking for any edge, any advantage, any insight that might help me in my transformation. I cut out everything from my life that wasn't serving my goal, stopped watching television, stopped scrolling mindlessly on social media, stopped hanging out with friends who were content to complain about life rather than change it, eliminated every distraction and every excuse until all that remained was the work, the constant daily work of becoming someone new. People around me started to notice the change. My co-workers asked why I was always reading during breaks, instead of joking around like I used to. My few friends asked why I never had time to hang out anymore. My family worried that I was becoming obsessed with something they didn't understand. And maybe I was obsessed, but I didn't care, because obsession was what I needed. Single-minded focus was what would get me from where I was to where I needed to be. I started looking for opportunities to build skills that would be valuable. I volunteered for extra projects at work that gave me experience with scheduling and logistics. I took free online courses in anything that seemed relevant. I practiced public speaking by recording myself talking about random topics until I could speak confidently without stuttering or rambling. I learned basic accounting and finance by managing my own money more carefully and studying how successful people handled theirs. Every day I was building, brick by brick, the foundation of a new person, someone competent and capable and confident. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. I needed to also work on the external, on how I presented myself to the world. I started paying attention to how successful people dressed, how they carried themselves, how they spoke, how they interacted with others. I couldn't afford expensive clothes yet, but I could make sure everything I owned was clean and pressed and fit properly. I could learn about color coordination and appropriate attire for different situations. I could practice standing with good posture and making eye contact and giving firm handshakes. I watched videos of successful business people giving speeches and presentations, studying their body language, their tone of voice, their word choice, their ability to command attention and respect. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror until those behaviors started to feel natural rather than forced, until I could almost believe I was the person I was pretending to be. The physical transformation was important too. I started exercising regularly, not just the physical labor from work, but actual structured workouts that built strength and endurance and gave me more energy and confidence. I cleaned up my diet as much as my budget allowed, cutting out junk food and alcohol, making sure I was fueling my body properly for the marathon I was running. I got a cheap gym membership and went religiously, enjoying the burn in my muscles, the exhaustion that meant I was pushing myself, the gradual changes in my appearance as I became fitter and stronger. It sounds extreme as I'm telling you this, and maybe it was, but I felt like I was at war, fighting against everything that had held me back, battling the version of myself that had accepted humiliation, and war requires total commitment, complete dedication, an unwillingness to accept anything less than victory. The first real obstacle came about 3 months into my transformation, when I hit what felt like an insurmountable wall and almost gave up on everything I'd been working toward. I had been making good progress, learning constantly, improving daily, building momentum, but I was still working the same dead-end job, still living in the same cramped apartment, still struggling to make ends meet, and the gap between where I was and where I wanted to be seemed as vast as ever. I started to doubt whether any of this effort actually mattered, whether I was just fooling myself into thinking I could become something more, whether those people at the restaurant had been right about me all along. The doubt was insidious, creeping in during weak moments, whispering that I was wasting my time, that people like me don't get to have transformations like the ones I'd read about, that success is for other people, people who were born with advantages I'd never have. I remember one particularly dark night when I seriously considered giving up, just accepting my lot in life, and stopping this exhausting pursuit of something that seemed impossible. I was tired, so deeply tired from working all day and then studying all night, from pushing myself constantly with no visible results, from sacrificing everything for a future that might never come. I sat on my couch, much like I had 3 months earlier, but this time, instead of feeling determined, I just felt defeated, like I'd been running as hard as I could, only to realize I was on a treadmill going nowhere. I actually cried that night, not the hot tears of anger from the restaurant, but the hollow tears of despair, the kind that come when you're too exhausted to fight anymore. But then, in that moment of complete breakdown, I thought about them again, about the hostess with her cruel smile, about the laughter that had echoed in that entrance, about the assumption that I was nothing and would always be nothing. And I felt that anger again, that cold fury that had started everything, and I realized that giving up now would prove them right, would validate every terrible thing they'd thought about me, would mean their casual cruelty had won. I couldn't let that happen, wouldn't let that happen, so I picked myself up, wiped my tears, and went back to work with renewed determination, understanding now that this was going to be harder than I'd imagined, that there would be many more nights like this one, but that I had to keep going anyway because the alternative was unacceptable. I changed my approach slightly after that crisis, realizing I needed to find ways to measure progress that weren't just about the end goal. I started celebrating small victories, every new skill I learned, every bit of knowledge I gained, every improvement in my confidence or presentation or capabilities. I kept a journal where I wrote down what I'd accomplished each day, creating a record of progress that I could look back on when doubt crept in, proving to myself that I was moving forward even when it felt like I was standing still. I also started to open up a little bit to the few people in my life who might understand, carefully sharing parts of what I was doing and why, finding that sometimes just talking about the challenges helped me work through them. My mother, who had always been quietly supportive, became an unexpected source of encouragement, telling me she could see the changes in me, that I carried myself differently now, that there was a light in my eyes that hadn't been there before. Her belief in me, tentative as it was, gave me strength during those dark moments when my own belief wavered. Another obstacle was financial. I was trying to build skills and knowledge, but many of the resources and opportunities that could really accelerate my growth cost money I didn't have. I couldn't afford to go back to school, couldn't afford expensive training programs or certifications, couldn't afford to take unpaid internships or entry-level positions in better fields because I needed every dollar from my warehouse job just to survive. I felt trapped by poverty, even as I was trying to escape it, caught in that cruel catch-22 where you need money to make money, need opportunities to get opportunities. But I got creative. I found free resources wherever they existed. I networked with people online who were willing to share knowledge without charging for it. I bartered my time and skills in exchange for learning opportunities. I became shameless about asking for help and advice from anyone who might offer it. I learned that there's always a way forward if you're willing to be flexible and humble and resourceful, that limitations only stop you if you let them. I also realized that I needed to start generating income beyond my warehouse job if I was ever going to have the resources to make bigger moves. So I started doing side work, anything I could find that would bring in extra money without taking too much time away from my learning and development. I did online freelancing, helped people move on weekends, took on odd jobs that paid cash, slowly building up a small cushion of savings that represented freedom, options, possibilities. It was exhausting working essentially 2 jobs while also dedicating hours every day to studying and improving myself. But I kept thinking about that restaurant, kept using that memory as fuel when I wanted to quit. The social isolation was another challenge I hadn't fully anticipated. My old friends had drifted away because I was never available anymore, always too busy working or learning, and I hadn't made new friends because I wasn't investing time in social activities. There were moments when I felt incredibly lonely, wondering if this transformation was worth the cost, if success would mean anything if I had no one to share it with. But I reminded myself that this was temporary, that I was in a season of building, and that real relationships would come later when I had more to offer, when I was someone worth knowing. It sounds cold when I say it like that, but it was the truth I needed to accept, that the person I was at that moment, consumed by this project of self-transformation, wasn't in a position to be a good friend or partner to anyone, that I needed to finish becoming who I was meant to be before I could properly connect with others. Have you ever felt so alone in your pursuit of something that you wondered if you were crazy, if everyone else was right and you were wrong? That's where I lived for almost a year, in that strange, solitary space between who I had been and who I was becoming, belonging fully to neither world, trusted by no one, including sometimes myself. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, as these things often do, about 14 months into my transformation journey, when I had almost accepted that progress would always be this slow and grinding. I had been applying for better jobs for months, positions that would use the skills I'd been developing, but I kept getting rejected, either because I lacked formal credentials or because something in my presentation still wasn't quite right. Each rejection stung, confirming my fears that maybe the warehouse was all I was qualified for, that maybe I'd reached the ceiling of what someone like me could achieve. But I kept applying anyway, treating each rejection as a learning opportunity, studying the interview process, refining my resume, improving my answers to common questions. Then one day I got a call about a junior sales position at a tech company, not a huge role, not great money, but better than the warehouse and in an industry with growth potential. I went into that interview determined to nail it, drawing on everything I'd learned about confidence and presentation and communication. I researched the company obsessively beforehand, prepared thoughtful questions, practiced my answers until they felt natural. And something clicked during that interview. I wasn't pretending to be someone else anymore. I'd actually become someone new, someone who could sit across from these corporate professionals and hold my own, someone who belonged in that conference room discussing business and sales strategies. They must have sensed it too, because 3 days later, they called to offer me the position. I remember hanging up the phone and just sitting there in stunned silence, hardly able to believe it was real, that I'd actually done it, that I'd taken the first major step out of the hole I'd been stuck in. The salary was almost double what I'd been making at the warehouse, which meant I could finally breathe a little, could save more aggressively, could invest in myself in ways that had been impossible before. But more than the money, it was the validation, the proof that my transformation was working, that I really could become someone different, someone better. I started that sales job with a hunger and intensity that probably seemed strange to my co-workers. I treated it like it was the most important position in the world, worked longer hours than anyone else, volunteered for every difficult task, studied the top performers to understand what made them successful, positioned myself as indispensable. Within 6 months, I was the top salesperson on my team, not because I was naturally talented at sales, but because I outworked everyone else, because I'd learned to handle rejection from all those months of job hunting, because I had something to prove that went beyond just meeting quotas. The recognition started coming, awards and bonuses and attention from upper management, and with it came opportunities. I was invited to training programs, given larger clients, included in strategic meetings, treated like someone with potential rather than just another employee. It was intoxicating. This taste of success, this feeling of being valued and respected, of having people take me seriously instead of dismissing me. I moved out of my cramped apartment into a better place, nothing fancy yet but a significant upgrade, a space that felt like it belonged to the person I was becoming rather than the person I had been. I bought new clothes, real professional attire that fit properly and made me feel confident. I could see the difference in how people responded to me, how they treated me with more respect, how I was finally becoming visible in the way I'd always wanted to be. The momentum was building now, each success leading to more opportunities, each improvement in my circumstances enabling further growth. I got promoted to senior sales associate, then to account manager, then to sales team leader, climbing the ladder faster than anyone expected, including myself. With each promotion came more money, more responsibility, more proof that I was not the person those restaurant staff had seen, that I had transcended those origins, that I was becoming something entirely new. But even as I was succeeding professionally, I never forgot why I'd started this journey, never forgot the humiliation that had catalyzed everything, never stopped thinking about that restaurant and the people who had laughed at me. They probably didn't remember that Tuesday afternoon, probably didn't give me a second thought after I walked out. I was just another nobody they'd dismissed, another insignificant interaction in their day. But I remembered everything. Every detail burned into my memory like a brand, and I knew that eventually I would go back, not as the broken person who had been refused, but as someone who could make them understand exactly what they'd done and exactly how wrong they'd been. The transformation wasn't complete yet. I was successful, but not yet successful enough. I had money, but not yet enough to truly command respect. I had confidence, but I needed to build more, needed to become so undeniably successful that there would be no question, no doubt, no room for anyone to dismiss me ever again. So I kept working, kept building, kept climbing, knowing that every step forward was bringing me closer to the moment I'd been dreaming about since that terrible Tuesday afternoon. By the time 2.5 years had passed since that humiliation, I was a completely different person in almost every measurable way, and some that couldn't be measured but were perhaps even more important. I had left the sales job for a better opportunity at a larger company, then leveraged that experience to start my own business consulting firm, helping companies improve their sales processes and customer experience strategies. It turns out that years of studying success and transformation and human psychology had given me insights that were valuable in the business world, that I could help others achieve goals while building my own success in the process. The business grew faster than I expected. I had a talent for understanding what clients needed and delivering results, for building relationships and trust, for identifying opportunities others missed. Within a year, I had a small team working for me. Within 18 months, I had clients across multiple states. Within 2 years, I was making more money than I'd ever imagined possible, certainly more than I could have dreamed of during those warehouse days. I invested wisely, saved aggressively, continued learning and growing, treating each new level of success not as a destination but as a platform for reaching even higher. I bought a house in a nice neighborhood, drove a luxury car, wore custom-tailored suits, had the kind of life I used to only see through windows. But the external trappings of success weren't what mattered most to me. What really mattered was the internal transformation, the fact that I now carried myself with genuine confidence rather than faking it, that I could walk into any room and belong there, that I had earned respect through my actions and achievements rather than begging for it based on my circumstances. I had become someone who commanded attention, who people listened to, who mattered in ways that the old me never could have imagined. My relationships with family improved dramatically too. I was able to help my parents financially, ensuring they didn't have to struggle anymore, seeing the relief in their faces as years of stress melted away, giving them some of the comfort and security they'd never been able to give me. My mother cried when I paid off their mortgage, told me she'd always known I had it in me, even when I didn't know it myself. Those moments were almost as sweet as any business success, knowing that my transformation had ripple effects beyond just myself, that I could lift up the people who had loved me, even when I was at my lowest. I was dating someone wonderful now too. Had met her at a networking event where she'd been impressed by a presentation I gave. We'd connected over shared values and ambitions, building something real that the lonely, struggling version of me could never have sustained. She knew parts of my story, knew where I'd come from and what I'd overcome, and it made her respect me more rather than less, see the strength and determination it had taken to transform so completely. But she didn't know everything. Didn't know about that Tuesday afternoon at the restaurant, didn't know about the burning need for validation that still lived somewhere deep inside me, still unresolved, still waiting for closure. I told myself I'd moved past it, that my success was proof enough that those people had been wrong, that I didn't need to go back and confront them, that revenge was beneath the person I'd become. But I was lying to myself. I knew I was lying, because every time I drove past that restaurant, I felt something tighten in my chest, felt that old shame trying to resurface, remembered exactly how small they had made me feel, and realized that no amount of success would truly heal that wound until I faced them again. I started planning my return, thinking through exactly how I would do it, what I would say, what I wanted to accomplish beyond just showing off my transformation. It couldn't be just about flaunting my success, though that would certainly be part of it. It needed to be about dignity, about teaching them something about the cost of cruelty, about making them understand that the person they had dismissed was a human being deserving of respect regardless of circumstances. I researched the restaurant, learned it was still operating with much of the same staff, discovered that the hostess who had laughed at me was now the front-of-house manager, which somehow made the situation even more perfect. I made reservations under my company name, specifying that I needed a table for an important business dinner, ensuring they would prepare their best service, their finest attention, their most obsequious hospitality. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was using the very system that had excluded me to ensure my entry, that money and status were the keys that opened doors that human decency should have opened all along. As the date of my reservation approached, I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This confrontation I'd been building toward for almost 3 years was finally going to happen, and I wasn't entirely sure how I'd react when I saw them again, when I stood in that entrance where I'd been so thoroughly humiliated. Would the old feelings come back? Would I freeze? Would the confidence I'd built crumble when faced with the scene of my greatest shame? Or would I be able to stand tall, to embody the transformation I'd worked so hard to achieve, to look them in the eyes as an equal rather than as someone begging for permission to exist? The night finally came, and I drove to that restaurant with my heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years, all my careful confidence suddenly feeling shaky as I pulled into the parking lot and stared at those same glass doors I'd walked through with such hope and walked out of with such devastation. I sat in my car for a few minutes, expensive suit, perfectly tailored, watch that cost more than I used to make in 6 months gleaming on my wrist, hair expertly cut, every external detail screaming success. But inside I was still that hurt, humiliated person, wondering if I belonged. I took several deep breaths, reminded myself of everything I'd accomplished, everything I'd overcome, everything I'd become, and then I stepped out of my car and walked toward those doors with my head held high, ready to close this chapter of my life once and for all. The entrance looked exactly the same. I half expected to see ghosts of that terrible afternoon playing out around me, but everything was different too because I was different, fundamentally and completely transformed. I pushed open those heavy glass doors and stepped inside, immediately noting the same elegant lighting, the same sophisticated atmosphere, the same smell of expensive food and wine. And there she was, standing at the hostess stand, just as she had been 3 years ago, her face a little older but still recognizable, still carrying herself with that air of superiority, that confidence that came from controlling access to spaces people wanted to enter. She looked up as I approached, and I saw her professional smile appear, the one she reserved for guests who looked like they belonged, so different from the contemptuous expression she'd given me last time. "Good evening," she said warmly. "Do you have a reservation?" Her eyes showed no recognition. Why would they? I was nothing to her. A forgotten moment, an insignificant interaction lost among thousands of others. But I recognized her instantly, knew her voice, her mannerisms, the way she tilted her head slightly when assessing a guest. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and confident, nothing like the shaky nervousness of our last encounter. "Reservation for Morrison, party of 1. She checked her computer, nodding. "Of course, Mr. Morrison. We have your table ready. Thank you so much for choosing our establishment for your business dinner this evening." The irony of her words almost made me laugh. This establishment that had refused me service was now thanking me for choosing them, rolling out hospitality for the version of me they found acceptable while having no idea they were serving the same person they'd humiliated. She grabbed a menu and gestured for me to follow, leading me into the dining room past all those tables that had been unavailable when I was poor and desperate, to a prime spot near the window, the kind of table they reserve for important guests. She pulled out my chair, asked if the table was satisfactory, assured me that my server would be right with me, all the practiced hospitality that she'd withheld from me before. I thanked her politely, watching her walk away, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and emptiness. I was here, I'd made it, but something felt unfinished, incomplete. The meal was excellent, everything I'd imagined it would be 3 years ago, but I barely tasted it, too consumed with thinking about what I was going to do, how I was going to handle this. I'd planned this confrontation so many times in my mind, rehearsed what I'd say, imagined their reactions, but now that the moment was here, I felt strangely uncertain. What did I really want from this? An apology? Recognition of their wrong? To make them feel as small as they'd made me feel? I finished eating and asked for the manager, and my server's eyes widened slightly, probably assuming there was a problem, scurrying off to find her. A few minutes later, the hostess, manager now, approached my table with a concerned expression. "I understand you asked to speak with me, sir. I'm Sarah Chen, the front-of-house manager. Is everything all right with your meal?" she asked, her voice professional but with an underlying tension, the universal fear of negative reviews and complaints. "The meal was perfect," I said, gesturing to the empty plate in front of me. "Please sit down for a moment. I'd like to talk to you about something." She hesitated, clearly not used to guests asking her to sit, but the authority in my voice and my appearance convinced her to comply. She perched on the edge of the chair across from me, hands folded neatly, that professional smile still fixed in place but her eyes wary. "Do you remember me?" I asked, watching her face carefully. She studied me for a moment, clearly trying to place where she might know me from, probably running through her mental catalogue of regular customers or business contacts. "I'm sorry, sir, I'm not sure that I do. Have you dined with us before?" The fact that she didn't remember, that I had been so insignificant to her that my humiliation had left no mark on her memory, somehow hurt more than I expected. But it also freed me, because this wasn't about her at all, not really. It was about me, about proving to myself that I had truly transformed. 3 years ago, I began, my voice even and controlled, I came to this restaurant. I had saved for months, was wearing my best clothes even though they weren't very good, and I asked for a table. You were the hostess then, and you looked at me with such contempt, told me you were fully booked even though there were clearly empty tables. And then you laughed at me. You and 2 other staff members laughed right in my face, suggested I'd be more comfortable at the burger place down the street. Do you remember now? I watched as confusion crossed her face, followed by a flicker of uncertainty, then something that might have been recognition or might have been fear. She was probably trying to remember, but also calculating whether I was about to cause a scene, whether this polished, successful-looking man in front of her was really claiming to be someone she'd once dismissed. I'm not sure I remember that specific incident," she said carefully. "We see so many guests." "Of course you don't remember," I said, not with anger, but with something closer to sadness. "I was nobody to you, just another person you decided didn't belong here, another face in the crowd of people you judged and found wanting. But I remember everything about that day, every word you said, every laugh, the exact expression on your face when you told me I should know my place. And I want you to understand something. That moment changed my entire life." She was fully uncomfortable now, shifting in her seat, probably debating whether to call security, whether to apologize, even though she didn't really remember, whether to deny everything. "Sir, if something inappropriate happened, I sincerely apologize. Our restaurant prides itself on welcoming all guests." "Save it," I said, waving away her corporate apology. "I didn't ask you to sit down so you could give me some rehearsed response. I asked you here because I want you to truly understand what you did. When you refused me service that day, when you laughed at me, you broke something inside me. You confirmed every terrible thing I'd ever thought about myself, every fear that I wasn't good enough, that people like me don't deserve nice things or dignified treatment. You made me feel invisible, worthless, like I didn't deserve to exist in the same spaces as real people." I paused, watching her face, seeing shame starting to creep into her expression. Whether from actual memory or just from the weight of my words, I couldn't tell. But here's the thing you need to know. That humiliation, as painful as it was, became the catalyst for the biggest transformation of my life. I went home that night and made a decision that I would never let anyone make me feel that way again. And over the past 3 years, I completely rebuilt myself. Went from a warehouse worker making minimum wage to owning a successful consulting business, from someone you could dismiss with a laugh to someone you roll out the red carpet for. The person sitting in front of you now, the one you've been so eager to please tonight, is the same person you turned away 3 years ago. I didn't change because I became fundamentally different. I'm still me, still the same human being deserving of respect. The only thing that changed was my external circumstances, my clothes, my confidence, my bank account, the signals that tell people like you whether someone is worth treating with dignity. She was looking down now, unable to meet my eyes, and I could see her hands trembling slightly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and this time it sounded genuine rather than practiced. "I don't remember specifically, but I believe you, and I'm ashamed. We should never have treated you that way, regardless of how you looked or what you were wearing. Everyone deserves respect." "You're right," I agreed. "Everyone does deserve respect. But your systems, your society, they don't operate that way, do they? They judge people by their appearance, their perceived status, their ability to afford things. And people like you, gatekeepers of these spaces, you enforce those judgments, deciding who belongs and who doesn't based on the most superficial criteria." I leaned forward slightly, making sure she heard every word. "I want you to think about something every single time you're standing at that hostess stand. The next person who walks through those doors wearing shabby clothes, looking nervous and out of place, they might be like I was, someone who saved for months for one special meal, someone who's dreaming of something better, someone who's trying so hard, despite circumstances beyond their control, and how you treat them in that moment matters more than you can possibly imagine. You have the power to either build someone up or break them down, to either welcome them with dignity or send them away with shame. And I promise you, they will remember which one you choose, even if you forget them immediately." "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely audible, tears starting to form in her eyes. "An apology? To tell everyone what I did? To quit my job? I'll do whatever you want." I sat back, considering her question, realizing that I didn't actually want revenge in the way I'd once imagined. Seeing her discomfort didn't bring me the satisfaction I'd expected. It just made me tired of carrying this hurt, tired of defining myself by that terrible afternoon. "I don't want revenge," I said finally. "I want change. I want you to really internalize what I'm telling you, to let it change how you treat people, especially people who seem vulnerable or out of place. I want you to train your staff differently, to create a culture in this restaurant where everyone is welcomed with dignity, regardless of how much money they appear to have. I want you to remember me, not as someone you wronged, but as someone who taught you that you can never really know someone's story, their struggles, their potential, just by looking at them." I pulled out my wallet and placed several $100 bills on the table, more than enough to cover the meal and leave a substantial tip. "Consider this payment not just for tonight's dinner, but for the lesson you refused me 3 years ago. The lesson that everyone deserves a chance, everyone deserves respect, everyone deserves to feel like they belong in beautiful spaces." I stood up, looking down at her one more time. "I forgive you for what you did, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve peace. I spent 3 years carrying the weight of that humiliation, using it as fuel to transform myself, and it served its purpose. But I don't need to carry it anymore. What you do with this conversation, whether you actually change or just forget about it as soon as I walk out, that's up to you. But I've said what I needed to say, and now I can finally let this go." She was crying openly now, nodding, trying to speak but unable to form words. I walked toward the exit, aware of the other diners watching, probably wondering what drama had unfolded at that table. As I reached the door, I turned back one more time, seeing her still sitting there, the weight of what I'd said clearly affecting her in ways my original revenge fantasies never could have. And in that moment, I realized that the sweetest victory wasn't making them regret laughing at me. It was proving to myself that I had become someone who could show mercy, who could educate rather than destroy, who could use power to teach rather than to punish. I walked out into the night air, feeling lighter than I had in 3 years, like I'd finally set down a burden I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. My transformation was complete, not just externally in terms of success and status, but internally in terms of character and values. I had started this journey driven by rage and hurt and a desperate need to prove my worth, but I was ending it with compassion and understanding and genuine peace. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd become exactly what that restaurant represented, someone who had access and privilege and power, but I'd also learned something that many people with those advantages never learn, that having them doesn't make you better than anyone else, doesn't give you the right to judge or dismiss or dehumanize people who don't. I drove home thinking about everything that had happened, the journey from that warehouse to this moment, the person I'd been and the person I'd become, the pain that had catalyzed growth and the growth that had led to wisdom. And I realized that while I'd spent 3 years focused on that restaurant and those people, the real story was never about them at all. It was about me, about discovering strength I didn't know I had, about learning that transformation is possible even when it seems impossible, about understanding that the opinions of others only have the power we give them, about recognizing that true success isn't measured by wealth or status, but by who you become in the process of achieving those things. Looking back now, months after that final confrontation, I see that entire experience differently. Yes, what they did was wrong, cruel even, and the humiliation I felt was real and deep and damaging, but it was also, in a strange way, a gift, because it woke me up from the sleepwalking existence I'd been living, forced me to confront who I was and who I wanted to be, gave me a clear before and after moment that divided my life into what came before and what came after. Without that pain, I might have stayed in that warehouse forever, might have accepted mediocrity, might have never discovered what I was truly capable of achieving. That thought doesn't excuse their behavior, doesn't make what they did acceptable, but it does help me understand that sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the most transformative. That rock bottom can be the foundation on which we build something remarkable. I've tried to pay forward the lessons I learned, both in my business and in my personal life. I make a point of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their circumstances, remembering how much it mattered to me when I was on the other side. I mentor young people from backgrounds similar to mine, sharing my story not to brag, but to show them that transformation is possible, that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. I've gone back to that restaurant a few times since that confrontation, and each visit the staff treats me with the kind of respect they should show everyone. Sarah always makes a point of checking in personally, asking if everything is satisfactory, and I can see in her eyes that she really did take our conversation to heart, that she's genuinely trying to be better. The restaurant has actually changed their policies too. I've noticed them welcoming guests who might have been turned away before, giving people chances rather than making snap judgments. It's a small victory, but it matters because it means my pain wasn't meaningless. It led to real change, even if it's just within one establishment. My relationship with my parents has deepened in beautiful ways. They've watched my transformation with pride and amazement, but more importantly, they've allowed me to help them, to give them the security and comfort they worked their entire lives to provide for me, but never quite achieved for themselves. My mother tells me stories now about the women she used to clean houses for, and we talk about class and dignity and worth in ways we never could before, bonding over shared understanding of what it means to be dismissed and overlooked and judged for circumstances beyond your control. My father, who was always so defeated by life, has found new energy in retirement now that financial stress isn't crushing him. He's taken up hobbies, made friends, rediscovered joy that had been buried under years of struggle. Seeing them happy, truly happy for the first time in my memory, that brings me more satisfaction than any business success ever could. The relationship I mentioned has continued to grow too. My partner has become someone I trust with my whole story, including the darker parts, the obsession and anger that drove my transformation, and she loves me not despite those things, but because of what they reveal about my capacity for determination and growth. She challenges me in good ways, helps me maintain perspective, reminds me when I'm being too hard on myself or others, grounds me when success starts to go to my head. Together we've talked about the dangers of defining yourself by external validation, of needing approval from others to feel worthy, and she's helped me understand that while my transformation was necessary and valuable, my worth as a human being was never actually tied to my accomplishments or status. I was always deserving of dignity and respect, even when I was broke and struggling. That's a lesson I'm still learning, still working to internalize because those early wounds run deep, and healing takes time. I think about that version of me often, the person I was 3 years ago, walking out of that restaurant with tears on his face and shame in his heart. I wish I could go back and tell him that everything will be okay, that the pain he's feeling will become power, that he's about to embark on the most incredible journey of his life. But I also know that he needed to feel that pain fully, needed to sit with that humiliation and let it transform him, because easy comfort would have kept him stuck. Sometimes we need to be broken before we can become whole, need to hit bottom before we can rise, need to feel the full weight of injustice before we find the strength to fight back. That's not to say that suffering is good or necessary for everyone, but in my case, that particular suffering at that particular moment was the catalyst I needed. If you're going through something similar right now, if someone has made you feel small or worthless or invisible, I want you to know that you have a choice in how you respond. You can let their cruelty define you, accept their judgment as truth, allow their assessment to become your reality. Or you can do what I did. Use that pain as fuel, channel that hurt into determination, transform that humiliation into motivation for becoming someone they would never have expected you to become. It won't be easy. The path I took was exhausting and lonely and filled with doubt and setbacks. But it's possible. I'm living proof that it's possible, that you can completely reinvent yourself if you're willing to do the work, make the sacrifices, maintain the focus, and refuse to give up even when every reasonable voice is telling you to quit. The key is remembering that you're doing this for yourself, not for them, not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right, to show yourself what you're truly capable of when you decide that enough is enough. Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever been judged, dismissed, or humiliated based on circumstances beyond your control? I want you to comment below and share your story, because you're not alone. So many of us have experienced moments where the world tried to tell us we didn't matter, that we should stay in our place, that we should accept limitations others tried to impose on us. And if you're in the middle of your own transformation right now, struggling and doubting and wondering if it's worth it, please comment and let me know, because I want to encourage you, want to tell you to keep going, want you to know that I see you and I believe in you even when you don't believe in yourself. Understanding this content, really absorbing these lessons about resilience and transformation, and refusing to let others define your worth, that can genuinely change your life if you let it. I'm not exaggerating when I say that making the decision to transform yourself despite what others think or say or do, that's one of the most powerful choices you can make. So if this story touched you, if it resonated with something you've experienced or something you're going through, please leave a like on this video. That simple action tells me that these words mattered, that sharing my story was worth it, that maybe I've helped someone else find the strength to start their own transformation. And if you want to hear more stories like this, more real experiences of people who overcame adversity and transformed their lives, then please subscribe to Through My Eyes. This channel is dedicated to authentic, emotional stories that remind us of our shared humanity, that show us what's possible when we refuse to accept defeat, that inspire us to become better versions of ourselves. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that might be exactly what you need to hear in that moment. These stories matter. Your story matters. And together we're creating a community of people who understand that where you start doesn't determine where you finish, that transformation is always possible, that dignity and respect should never be conditional on circumstances. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this journey. And remember that you are worthy of respect, of opportunities, of beautiful spaces and beautiful experiences, regardless of what anyone else might think or say. Never let anyone make you feel invisible again. Never accept their limitations as your reality. And never forget that the person who laughed at you today might be learning from you tomorrow. That's the power of transformation, and it's available to all of us if we're brave enough to claim it.